paying for it himself by selling postcards, but simply because he didn't think the salon was the best way of showing his art, to various avant-gardes, to someone like Felix González Torres, who himself in 1991 organized, I mean, it was a solo presentation of his own work, but it was called Every Week There's Something Different. And it was at a moment just as the US was, at the height of the first Gulf War, when questions of politics and daily reality was changing, if not weekly, hourly, in which he wanted to make an exhibition in which every week he was completely changing the arrangement and contents. On the one hand, I had this model for how important the artist could be in reconceiving what an exhibition's form could look like. And on the other hand, I was confronted with the request to do a Felix González Torres retrospective. And it was my very first project as a new curator at Wheels in Brussels. And it was the director of the institution who had for some years really wanted a Felix González Torres exhibition. And his Felix González Torres is maybe different from my Felix González Torres, say, the reasons or the interest we might have in the artist. But he was someone I was indeed very interested in. But my first response was, maybe you call it refusal or withdrawal. I went back to my director and said, I don't think we should do this retrospective. I don't think, having looked at the work, having read interviews with the artist, having looked at what I thought the most important legacy he had left behind, for me it may be more important than an aesthetics of the candy pile, which you don't see so much. That's not where his legacy is. For me it was a kind of questioning of authority. That was a very fundamental aspect of how his work functioned. And I thought, if there is an artist who, at the very center of what may look like beautiful bonbon sweets or candy piles, in fact, and paper piles and light strings, there is this fundamental question: how can we, or how can I, as a curator, impose the authority of a retrospective in which I would be the person that says these 40 works in this particular order, in this scenography, is history, becomes history.
You made each show in two parts. So there is the part where you curated, and I don't know if you consider yourself then as an author or is it just, are you more like the one that arranges a display with a lot of distance on contents? Do you want to kind of like install a narrative, how to see the show, and then you invited the artist to kind of like, is it an answer on the show you proposed, or is it something they prepared by themselves as an idea how to display the work of Felix González Torres?
I think it's a misconception to think that when a curator, whether artist or professional curator, is making a show, that there isn't a sense of a narrative, of a selection, of a scenography, of a dramaturgy, of a politics, of an ideology. There is no such thing as the neutral show. So starting from that principle, what I wanted to make is simply a show in which there could be no sense of neutrality. Because every single venue at which it was shown, there was one version and another. And it's not that one was any more right or authoritative or absolute than the other. There could be no absolute. And that's
It's interesting that you say the moment you have selection, you have personal politics or broader politics, you have an author. The very funny thing is that the absent signifier in Buren's text is selection. The text where he says, where are the artists, there is like one thing he avoids at all time. He suggests a bit the possibility of what he calls exhibition organizers that have no authorial capacity in organizing exhibitions. And it's kind of like something that is very accepted up till the 60s, 70s. And of course, and we know this whole history that we kind of like researched our own profession, and we saw that everything that was repressed in that type of discourses, that it was kind of false to assume that there is no author or that there is no narrative, etc. But how do you think about that? How would an intelligent person as Daniel Buren kind of write a text where he avoids this notion of selection, of authorship, and still kind of advances the idea, this kind of utopia of maybe a retrospective or an exhibition of an artist that supposedly is neutral?
I mean, I think on the one hand, and you put your finger on it at the beginning, there was not really, the word curator as we know it now didn't exist then. So on the one hand, he's grappling with on a terrain that hasn't, that, you know, we're talking about something else entirely. On the other hand, it could be particular to Buren. I mean, you could say, I say this a little bit to be provocative, but he is someone who doesn't select. He's just always painting lines. It's always the same thing. So inherent in his practice is that it's always ever the same. And
but at the same time, he refused to share authorship with Mosset and Toroni, because that was the whole problem when the whole group exploded, when Olivier Mosset proposed to kind of exchange identities, that Buren would sign the circles, Parmentier the lines of Buren, and the other one. Yeah. So there is at that moment he reclaims authorship.
Although he insists that he does not ever sign anything.
Yes. Well.
So but yeah, when it always looks like, I mean, you can't see stripes without thinking of Buren. So there's another form of signature that happens, of course.
Exactly. What happened then? Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, you said it a couple times, this word author. And it's something that, you know, I still am of mixed mind about, because on the one hand, I categorically refuse the idea that was in vogue at a certain moment, and maybe it's not so much anymore, I don't know, I'm not following it so closely, of curators thinking of themselves as quasi-artists or co-producers of the artwork, or the exhibition as itself some kind of autonomous entity englobing all of the objects in it. And this I can't identify with, don't want to do anything to promote. And then this gets mixed up with the idea of the curator as author. I don't know, I never refer to myself as an author. On the other hand, I believe in the question of responsibility. And at the end of the day, someone has to be responsible for the selection you've made, the order you've put it in, because it's not neutral. And in that way, making an exhibition, you know, something that called itself a retrospective, that aimed to an idea of presenting a body of work of a dead artist, and this is a very particular responsibility. The artist is not there to tell you, you know, he likes it or doesn't like it, or it should be like that, or it shouldn't. So there is a certain responsibility there, and I felt my responsibility was to attend to the work in a way that did justice to it, that, let's say, on the one hand, could properly honor it, but also honor some of the very ideas that drove it, without myself becoming a meta-artist. I don't believe in that.
No, that's probably why you choose the binary structure.
It's part of the reason, but also something that's quite important is that I came from a position of, you know, I never met Felix González Torres. I never saw an exhibition that had been installed by him.
And did some of your invited artists meet him? Okay.
No.
So there is none of the involved persons.
We had no authority. And that was very important, that none of us had, let's say, the authority of having known the artist and having. None of us were going to replicate what he did because we knew how he had done it or how he should have or would have done it. All we could do was do what any exhibition does, kind of provide a reading of the work and make that reading public. And for better or for worse. And the fact is, each of the two sets of exhibitions, and the 6 now in all, were so different one from another. I gave myself the challenge of each of mine also being different, but each of the artists were
How
very
did
different
you
from
choose
mine.
the artists? It's kind of like that. That's very fascinating. Okay, who do you choose to curate as an artist with a body of work of themselves? A Felix González Torres show.
Well, I specifically wanted artists who claimed the influence of Felix González Torres in their own work. So I wanted people who knew the work well, but hadn't known the person. So this idea of their not having authority to do what they're doing. So they would be respectful, but also irreverent, if you can imagine the two together. That it had to come from a place of knowledge and admiration, but that they would be free and feel free to do what maybe a curator perhaps would not.
That's coming to a certain point. Did they introduce work of their own?
No. This
Nothing.
It was a.
Or could it be interpreted as a work of their own?
But of course, I mean, this is always the risk. And of course, now, just for the next few days, the version of Tino Segal is up, and the question has come up so much because, in fact, as a curator, what he has decided is that he would make a show in which there is a choreography that he has scripted, let's say. And he has taught the 7 people who are let's say, the maintenance crew of the exhibition, and they are moving the pieces in the show, which is really 6 shows. So they're moving every 20 minutes. They're sometimes even faster. They're moving pieces so that every room in the exhibition changes while you're going through the exhibition. And so, yeah. And in fact, part of this is really inspired by the work itself. The fact that one of the kind of essential ways that González Torres worked and left his work was that with this incredible malleability. So we tend to look at exhibition.
There is malleability, but it's not that there are no scores or something. It is works.
It is works. On the other hand,
you cannot do everything with the
we
work.
see pictures, and that's the thing. We see exhibition installation shots of candy piles, and they all look the same way. They're all in a corner, or they're all in a perfect geometric square or rectangle. The cold geometry of minimalism, which Felix was trying to work against, it comes back in exactly the way this is shown. Well, Tino did a version, and it's like a candy pile, and it's in the shape of South America.